This podcast may contain disturbing content for some listeners. It's intended for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised. This is True Crime XS.
All right, thank you. 7:31. Important segment here. More than 10 years ago, after the death of their daughter in Manayunk, a Pennsylvania couple continues to fight for justice. Just days after 27-year-old Ellen Greenberg, a teacher at Juniata Park Academy, sent out save the date cards for her upcoming wedding, she was found dead in her apartment by her fiance. It was January 26, 2011. This is a portion of the 911 call her fiance made, as heard on the Crime Junkie podcast.
I went downstairs to go work out. I came back up. The door was latched. My fiance's inside. She wasn't answering. So after about a half hour, I decided to break it down. I see her now just on the floor with blood. Like she's not responding.
Then later on the call,
oh my God, she stabbed herself.
Where?
She fell with a knife. Oh no.
Officials counted 20 stab wounds to her body. Police on scene treated her death as a suicide. The next day, it was ruled a homicide. Then a few days later, the medical examiner changed the ruling once again to suicide. It was the start of a long, long legal battle for her parents, Sandy and Josh.
I want my daughter's name cleared because there's no way that she could have done this to herself.
Ellen's parents are back with us again this morning. Sandy and Josh, welcome again. And their investigator, Tom Brennan's here as well. Tom, thank you for coming in. I know it's 10 years later, but it doesn't get any easier, does it?
No, it doesn't.
The pain ever go away?
No.
No. So I've listened to this podcast about 3 times. They want us to believe, the initial police officers who showed up there, that your daughter stabbed herself 20 times.
It's ridiculous.
Ridiculous. Josh, seriously, how could they have come to that decision in that apartment in Manayunk? They walk in, she's been stabbed 20 times, and they call it a suicide?
This is no way. It's as my wife said, it's ridiculous. It's absurd, and our journey through this to today, over the decade or 10 years we've been involved in this, gets more ridiculous every day.
Yeah, it seems like the case was botched from the opening day. Tom, you've been investigating crimes for years and years. Do you agree with that?
Yes. If you look at the timeline from the 26th of January through the 28th of January, it totally discredits any good basic police work at all.
Yeah.
What transpired.
We'll get into how the crime scene was completely deep clean way too soon. The door was locked, right? Her door was locked from the inside.
This is all what we've been told. There was never really an investigation to clearly illustrate any of this.
Mm-hmm. What does that... she lived on... What floor was this on?
Sixth floor.
It's the sixth floor. So this was the only way in or out of her apartment. Well, you can go out on the balcony, but you're not going to climb down or climb up
Right,
again.
and there was a snowstorm that day. That's why she was home at 1 o'clock. Mm-hmm. And that was the only way in or out.
You were up in Harrisburg at the time?
Yes.
So I remember that huge snowstorm, my gosh. It was January of 2011. So you weren't able to come down right away?
No, we couldn't come.
We didn't get word of any of this until late into the evening. There were mounds of snow. Snow plows hadn't come through.
Who called you?
The fiance's father. And I didn't know what he meant. I said, where's the ambulance? And then he said, there is none.
Because we won't need one? and then you knew?
No, I didn't really.
It was shock. This is
Yeah.
not what you expect to get a call from. You have a 27-year-old daughter who's engaged to be married and living in Philadelphia with her fiance.
Had they been arguing?
Not to
Not that we
our
know of.
knowledge.
And she had been to see a psychiatrist because she was having some troubles. She was
was-
having trouble at school,
No, she
No?
had anxiety.
anxiety.
And-
Where was the anxiety coming from? Do you know?
I'm going to postulate, I can guess, there were various injuries on her body that were indicative of bruises and healing.
Okay, let's go back to that. So there are bruises all over her body, and those bruises were from maybe days, weeks before she was attacked.
They weren't part of that night.
Were not part of that night. So now you've got to figure out what that is all about.
We are babes in the woods. We had no knowledge. If you know anything about this type of problem, it's very unlikely that the victim is going to say anything to you. And we think she was a victim.
Yeah.
That's part of what's going on here.
Now, why in the world was the fiance's uncle allowed to go into her apartment and take Ellie's stuff, her computer and stuff like that, after the apartment was deep cleaned? So now there's no longer a crime scene. You can't get any material out of there now.
This was done by a prominent attorney, uncle, okay? And he's currently supposedly a judge on the state attorney's disciplinary board. Now, this individual removed Ellie's cell phone, the fiance's laptop, Ellie's work laptop, and Ellie's personal laptop. So right then and there, that negates that chain of evidence, okay? That adversely impacts the chain of evidence on those devices, so that anything that's discovered on those devices can be challenged in court.
Okay, any expert that you've hired since then, everybody that looks at this case says that Ellie was murdered.
Yes,
Correct.
it was a homicide.
It was a homicide, except for that initial report that day that said it was a suicide. But then it went to a homicide, then back to a suicide.
I think it went from
When-
homicide to suicide to homicide.
Really?
Yes.
So what do we
the
do?
officers,
What do we do now? I mean, obviously it needs to be reinvestigated. So we asked the Attorney General, is there anything you can do yesterday? And he wrote back in a statement, we've looked at all. No, we're not going to reopen this case as of now. He needs more evidence, he says. What is hard, he goes into how it's heartbreaking and all that, but he says they don't have legitimate new evidence to bring forward. It has not been brought forward yet, so we're not going to do anything. So what can we do? I know you have a petition. Maybe if we all put enough pressure through this petition, we can get it reopened.
Well, there are two things happening. Number one, there's a petition on change.org which has over 110,000 signatures that we had nothing to do with. We don't list that or whatever. Number two, we are going to go to trial. And the purpose of our trial is to get the suicide changed to either undecided or homicide, which we prefer, and have the case reopened and investigated.
Now, that'd be a non-jury trial.
It happens to be a bench trial, yes.
Okay, a bench trial.
The Philadelphia situation with trials right now is very overloaded.
You're not giving up.
No.
Why is it so important to get at least the determination changed from suicide to homicide?
She was our daughter. Mm-hmm. I mean, what would you do?
I would do the same thing you're doing.
The longer this goes on, the more we uncover, the more we discover. And just because you work for a government agency doesn't give you license to say whatever you want without facts and proving the facts.
Do you think the
know
key, the linchpin here, is what happened when they went into her apartment and took all of her stuff out?
We don't know the why or the who, so don't ask us the why.
It should have
or
been
who.
you two in her apartment taking her stuff.
Well,
Right.
theoretically, if he
No one had permission to touch her things.
theoretically, he should have returned it to us the next day at her funeral, which he did not do.
man, this excuse me. this statement by the Attorney General's office is vile.
Why do you say it's
a
vile?
lie?
Can you put it up again?
It's a lie. For him to say, okay, if legitimate new evidence is brought forward, okay, do they read the newspaper? Do they pay attention to podcasts? Do they have my phone number? Do they have Josh's phone number? Do they have Sandy's phone number?
Do you want to hear from them directly?
Well, it'd be better if they heard through our attorney so we know what to do and do it properly.
I met with them, and they promised to produce a document of a forensic analysis of Ellen's laptop.
All right, so why don't we help you get that, the two of you come together?
The reason you're not going to get it because they didn't do it.
Well, yeah.
It's a lie.
You know,
All right.
I
just keep coming back or keep us informed of how this is going, especially the bench trial. All right, and we'll come right back.
Can I say?
Okay, so the last episode ended with the audio of the 911 call. I'm curious, do you feel like, what did you think of the 911 call? I know I kind of put you on the spot with that, but like, what did you think of that?
I'm not really sure. It actually, so I feel, without seeing him, right, I'm not great at analyzing voices as far as like, you know, I assume you're saying like, was he authentic or, you know, is it staged? So listening to what he said, he could very well be either authentic or acting. I don't know. But the way that he's talking with the dispatcher, it makes no sense that he called two people.
That's sort of where I was headed with that.
Before he makes the 911 call, because it, like, how does he know that? I don't know. Maybe I'm off here, off my game. I don't see the way that he's talking to the 911 operator. I feel like if he made the calls after he called 911, that would make more sense because he's in this sort of stupor, whether it's authentic or he's acting, where he doesn't really know what's going on. And then there's a surprise reveal of the knife sticking in her heart, right? During the 911 call, because he's like, oh, there's a knife in her heart, right? And up until that point, like, he doesn't really know what's wrong with her. And then he says she fell on it. She stabbed herself. She fell on it. And that's sort of a weird thing to proclaim.
I think it's pretty genuine. So here's my position on this case, because you asked me some really specific questions along the way here. So first of all, let's take a look at the scenarios. It's not an accident. We know that because there's too many stabs to be an accident. There's over 20 stabs.
Yeah, definitely.
So it's not an accident. So from the police perspective, I guess we have three scenarios. Either he did it, and this is very elaborate, and I would say if he did it and they have some kind of evidence of him doing it, then it's going to be pretty obviously premeditated. Like, this is going to be something he set up. One of the things that you sort of posited to me as we were discussing this, you said, what if he came home from work or what if she came home because of the snow and caught him doing something? I think there would be evidence of that, but that's just one scenario where, okay, is this a premeditated homicide or a crime of rage from a partner? That's one scenario. Another scenario is there something we're missing from the intruder perspective? The door being able to be locked or rigged, if he can do it, then an intruder could do it. So there's that. And then there's the suicide angle. They decided suicide on some pretty circumstantial reasoning. Basically, there were some searches on her computer they cite in these documents that I have. Have you seen this whole internet searches?
Don't you think, though, that like the number one thing was the door being locked from the inside?
Number one thing for them
The
calling it a
finding of
suicide.
suicide, yes.
Well, I mean, that's why I mentioned it here. I mean, that's
Let me ask you something. If you returned home, and this is, I apologize, it's a little bit morbid. If you returned home and you found a loved one sitting up against the counter, not responding, purplish with blood, and you call your dad and your uncle, and then you call 911, and then when you're instructed to start CPR and you unzip the hoodie that your loved one is wearing and there's a knife sticking out there, she zipped it up after she was done stabbing herself. It would you think to myself, oh my God, she stabbed herself or fell on the knife? Or would you think, oh my God, somebody stabbed her?
I think I would think somebody stabbed her.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's weird that
this type of scenario would.
It really does.
I don't know what would come out of my mouth.
Well, okay. I understand that. And I could totally go along with, oh my gosh, there's a knife sticking out of her chest, which I believe he says. It's strange that his mind automatically goes to, she stabbed herself.
Well, I mean, this is a difficult case for police, and it's going to be even more difficult for the courts who are going to end up handling cases.
Do you think if it had remained undetermined that this would even be a thing?
If they had you mean like if on the medical certificate it said cause of death is like multiple stab wounds and the manner of death is undetermined. Is that what you mean?
Right.
Because we know how she died. She was stabbed to death, either by herself or by another person.
But when the manner of death is undetermined, it means that they can't determine if it was self-inflicted, accidental, or homicidal, right?
Absolutely.
And so my question is what happened was it was said to be a homicide, and then they were like ruling their daughter's death that has every indication from the injuries. If you just look at her body, you don't immediately think she did that to herself, right?
There's a guy over at Philly.com. His name is James Neff. He has uploaded a bunch of stuff to Document Cloud. In there, he cites, it's a 2-page document that's in here. And it's basically web searches between December the 18th and January the 10th. So several weeks prior to this. And among those is, I don't know the origin of this, so I am saying it. Someone named Stephanie Farr has annotated it and says, these are the internet searches done on Ellen Greenberg's computer provided by the State Attorney General's office. The yellow highlighting was already on this document when it was provided. This is just 2 pages of like web page listings with timestamps on the right side. The top says request key, right side says timestamp. And it has these listings for things related to Zoloft, Prozac side effects, citrulline, suffocation, suicide methods. And then, it sort of looks like they're searching on Google and then sort of going through a couple of web pages. It says, there's something on here about John Wheeler, which is the Pentagon official. It's got some stuff on here about fantasy death. Like, it's sort of like one of it says girl electrocuted to death trying to Twitter in the bathtub. One says euthanasia, a dangerous weapon. This is sort of how they're justifying this, these several weeks earlier. You asked me like some interesting questions about this case. And I don't go like super deep into this, but do you know who Jack Wheeler or John Wheeler was? He was on Unsolved Mysteries. Like, he was the guy that like ended up in the landfill back in 2010. So it was like a month before this. Anyways, there's a search for him in here. It was a mysterious death at the time, but not as mysterious as it would be today because it had just happened in December that year. So this is my thinking on all of this. You asked, had I ever seen a suicide with this many stab wounds? And you and I went hunting a little bit. The ultimate answer to that is yes. Yes, I have. And that's not even the record for what I've seen and what I've read about. But is this situation one of those situations for suicide? I don't know the answer to that yet. I do hope that they open this up just to close that gap. I did go through everybody's reports on the autopsies. I've read all about the wounds. I will make this available in the show notes if people if you just feel like you want to go and look at that repeatedly, because each individual, Henry Lee, Cyril Wecht, Wayne Ross, that comes along and talks about this, they re-examine each individual wound. And this document cloud link that I found has all of it. It's really cool. It actually has the medical examiner's report. So this is what you had given me related to this. Here's my thing on this case. The new evidence that included the surveillance footage also includes an allegation that a couple of the wounds were without hemorrhage and without bleeding, and they were basically indicated that they didn't seem to be pressure wounds or wounds that sealed by some positional situation. They believe they might have a couple of post-mortem wounds, which basically means she had died and whoever stabbed her kept stabbing. I think that where all of this is going appears to be the accusation that the fiance did it. If that's the case, this has to be premeditated, right? This can't be like a passion thing, or do you think?
Well, I mean, it could be in the heat of passion, but she's I'm confused about several things as far as, her last text message being 10 days earlier, because
it says that, but I have another document here that says it's the same day. It's in the response.
I know. And it's actually relevant because it is talking about the school closing because of the snow and her going home.
Yeah, it's just like a yay or something like it's
it's weird.
She's glad she's going home. Yeah,
because it doesn't really make sense that it's 10 days earlier, but it also doesn't quite look like it's a mistake because it's repeated, right?
Yeah.
So it could be that there was a breaking point, and I had mentioned to you perhaps one of them was at home, surprisingly, and it created tension that led to an argument and him snapping. But the whole situation of leaving the apartment, going to the gym, and coming back up and having the door latch on, if he did it, all that would have required quite a bit of planning. It seems I don't know that somebody that has just snapped and killed their fiance by stabbing them over 20 times, I don't know that it's going to occur to them to latch the door. Now, I will say that I feel like it'd be really easy to make that door latch close from the outside locked.
Oh, I agree. So it's been a really long time. I actually lived in a place that had one of those. And so it was a townhome, and the back door was like French doors, you could open and close them. But the front door had it had 3 locks. It had the lock you can turn on the knob. And then it had a deadbolt that had a key from the outside. But then it had what you described as a hotel guard. And I don't know exactly which one this was. But if I slammed that door hard enough, that guard would it wouldn't completely close, but it would move over enough that I could no longer get back in.
Right. And so what I saw was it's a ball that has a long, I don't know how to describe this. It has a long piece, and you fold one side over into the other side. And the point of it is when the door opens, the ball catches and it won't let it go past, a couple inches.
Yeah, one of them has a separate piece that swings out, and then there's one that turns like it's a deadbolt. It just doesn't have an outward facing keyhole. So I've had both, and either one, like, so one's more of like what you find in a hotel.
Do you know what the lock looks like, right?
I do not from the picture.
Oh, hold on. Okay,
you have a
hold
picture?
on. I do. This is the actual picture, and it's.
Oh, that's not what I was thinking of at all. That's
Well,
different.
that's why I said, have you seen it? Okay, but think about this. So you look at this, right? You walk out the door and you flip the lock over, but see, you can get your hand in there to do the part that makes it close. You can't do it to make it open.
Yeah.
So, and you see, I don't know if you can see where it's pulled off the door there. That's the damage that was done. You might have to click on it.
The loose screws on the left side.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see.
Okay. And so it's not, it wouldn't be really hard for that to be set up, right?
No, all that would take is like a coat hanger or a piece of fishing line. You can pull it over. But that puts it back in premeditated. It's not an intruder.
Well, here's what I thought. Okay, so really, if she didn't commit suicide, you're really looking at the fiance. Unless, which it seems unlikely because of the security situation at the apartment, but I feel like one thing that could partially be explained is if there was a confrontation with a random person, okay, and I say random, and all I mean by that is like not the fiance, okay? And like somebody came to the door and, whatever interaction occurred. Now, it seems like somebody else would have witnessed it, but I feel like it would make really good sense that she would slam the door and put the lock on to keep them away from her.
Yeah, but then how did they get in?
No, I'm saying like they're not inside. I'm saying the confrontation occurs and she somehow gets them out of the apartment and slams the door and locks it.
Oh, huh.
So that's where my brain went with it. And I said, okay, how do we, like, what's happening there? Now, is it anything? Well, I don't know, but let's say she did commit suicide. Why did she put the lock on?
I don't have an answer to that part. I hadn't thought of what you just said with it being like a potential intruder, but see, there's no struggle that's
right. But so that's another thing though, that, it comes into play. That was part of why they said it must be a suicide. And, really all the things lining up here, because if she came home, they got into a fight and she was killed, and then he thinks it through, he leaves to go to the gym, he would have had time potentially to clean up any sort of struggle. And when I say that, it would have to be the person in the apartment with her, right? And so that's not going to be a random situation. But let's just say for a second that, she has a stalker named Bob, okay? And Bob, knocks on her apartment door, and she opens the door, and there's some sort of exchange, and there isn't really a struggle, right? And, the knife to the heart, I immediately was like, oh my gosh, this is like totally stalker territory here. It's a weird thing. I thought, well, and then so she pushes him out and, she shuts the door and locks it. I do think it would be possible for her to do that without yet having blood all over herself.
But she doesn't even pull the knife out?
Well, I think she stumbled to the kitchen and sat down and I think for one thing, if that occurred, and I'm not saying it did, I was just going through scenarios in my head, okay? I actually feel like that is just as possible as her sitting there stabbing herself that many times, right? I mean, with I feel like she would have been like stunned, right? But then it falls apart if we believe the postmortem wounds, because I'm saying like the majority of what occurred happened while she was like in a way that she could push the intruder and the perpetrator out of the apartment and lock the door behind them. Because that door, the whole point of that door, that lock is, it's an extra safety precaution. And so it would make sense to me that she would like lock that if she was trying to put distance between herself and, somebody hurting her.
I tried to look at it. So I looked at all the stab wounds. It's not that I don't think any of them could be post-mortem, my next sentence that I'm going to make. I don't find anything she had going on to be very quick death. Like looking through them all, and I didn't see anything that looked like it would be fatal enough. And I guess what I'm saying there is these wounds, in order for some of them to be that's a quick attack. That's a blitz attack, like bomb, 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 bomb. And, I think they all happened in probably two big spurts or like one spurt, sort of all in a very collapsed amount of time. So them being post-mortem doesn't make any sense to me. In her ending up in the position that she's in. That's not, the stab wounds aren't even what was super interesting to me. At the bottom of the autopsy report, it says other injuries, and you may have just made an interesting case for this. The right upper arm has a round 3 by 4 centimeter contusion. The right forearm has a 3 by centimeter and a half area of 3 round contusions. The lower quadrant of the abdomen has 3 by 3.5 centimeter contusions. The right thigh has a vertical row of round contusions that are 2.5 by 3 centimeters, 4.5 by 3 centimeters, and 5 by 6 centimeters. Above the right knee is another 3 round contusions, 4.5 by 3 centimeters. So these are really small wounds that are occurring on the right side of her body. What if that's from slamming against the door and all the things that you hit when you do that?
That actually would make sense. Yeah.
Because like immediately when I see the description they have here, I actually think fingerprints. Not going to be like literal fingerprints, but I think like grabbing wounds. However, they said that some of them are in different, and I can't find like confirmation of how they said this. It just is in the summary that some of them appear to have been slightly healed. And I was wondering if like that's why they didn't put it together that it's the door, because some of the older ones that are like singular contusions, like on the lower right quadrant and the right upper arm are old wounds, but the 3, 3, and 3 that are on her forearm, her thigh, and her right above her right knee are new, and that is something that they're just missing because of it.
It's something to think about. It's really a crazy situation, and I feel like so if it had been undetermined, they would have been required to continue investigating because it was ruled to be a suicide ultimately. A lot of it looks like the attorney the parents have hired now, it looks like he's been able to get quite a bit of, information, but now, we're talking about a case it's 11 years old.
It is, and it's still tied up in legal wrangling at this point.
Just to sort of, not through. I don't know that the parents have. I read that they didn't think it was the fiance. Now, do you know anything about the milligrams of the medication that she was taking?
A little bit, as far as the mental health meds, you mean?
Yeah.
So here's my thing. I can tell you some of the therapeutic doses of what she's got going on. What I can't tell you is how that would show up in the system.
Okay, and so she was only on one medication, right?
Wait, no, it's 3. Hold on, I'll tell you the meds.
Well, I know it
So,
was Xanax, Klonopin, and Zoloft, but my understanding was the Zoloft didn't work, and she had switched to Xanax. And then I'm not sure about the Klonopin. I don't really know where that came into play. Is that right?
she had prescription medications from a bedside stand for uh, alprazolam, clonazepam, and zolpidem. So yeah, this is going to be Xanax, Klonopin, and that's going to be Zoloft.
Right. And so it seemed a little odd because the paperwork indicated she had gone to the therapist like beginning in January, and she was due to go back to the therapist the day after her death, right?
Correct.
And she'd already been put on Zoloft and then stopped taking Zoloft and then started the Xanax. I never saw how the Klonopin fit in there, but here's what I wanted to kind of get out there. So Zoloft is a very common antidepressant, and it works good for anti-anxiety for some people, okay? There's even the slightest hint of any sort of bipolar disorder. Typically, psychiatrists will not put that person on Zoloft because it can send certain types of people who are predisposed to being bipolar into manic states, okay? And it was sort of a joke that I read at one point in time because somebody was giving an assessment of what it feels like to be on all these different antidepressants. And the statement about Zoloft was, well, if you're bipolar and your doctor accidentally prescribed Zoloft to you, I hope that was fun. Because because people typically, when they respond to Zoloft, and it's not their cup of tea, they go into manic stages. Now, while I think that it is crazy that somebody would stab themselves over 20 times to kill themselves, I also think that in the event that there was a video of it happening and we were 100% sure it was her, I would say that would be pretty manic behavior.
Absolutely.
Right? Okay. And so I just wanted to sort of preface that I didn't get how, I'm not a doctor for certain, but I would say you've got to give medicine at least, I would say 6 weeks, but I don't think the 2 weeks she was on Zoloft would have been enough for them to switch it unless she was having pretty severe effects from it.
Well, she was, so in the course of that internet search I mentioned that's in the document cloud, there's a lot of searches related to citrulline and a lot of searches related to weight gain, depression, all the things that sort of surround it. And there was something in there, it was like Zoloft versus Prozac. I'm not sitting staring at it right this second, but she had done some research on the drugs themselves in the middle of what they put into those pages.
I saw that. I saw where she was researching that.
So, okay, this is where I stand on this. First of all, if they came up with evidence and there was something on video or something, say for instance, they ruled that it was probably more than likely a homicide, but the video surveillance indicates the only person coming or going was a fiance. All right, so that leans me one way. If they had some weird guy in a hoodie wandering around the surveillance video, that might lean me another way. Or if they came up with surveillance video where the fiance is clearly down at the gym the whole time and there's no one else that goes down their hall or anything. You know what I'm saying?
Or if the medical examiner had a better reason for changing it from homicide to suicide than the police department told me to.
But I'm saying ways this can change. I don't know that part can change. I don't know that they would have kept that information this much later.
What information?
So why they changed it? Like they can't.
saying
I'm saying things that can actually happen now with the Attorney General's office. You're saying something that's impossible to change, in my opinion. Like they're not going to be able to tell me a real
well,
reason.
the fact that it's no different than saying, either there was a reason or there wasn't. Just like either there was a guy wandering around in a hoodie or there wasn't. It's the same thing. We're not changing anything except like opening up possible like unexplored avenues, right?
Yeah. No, I'm just saying, like surveillance video, they just turned it into the Attorney General's office. They didn't turn any medical examiner statements into the Attorney General's office. So what I'm saying
Because
is, in the current
if
legal
they-
situation, those could be the outcomes.
And if there was some sort of like thoroughly investigated, compelling report done by the police department that the medical examiner relied on, right? I mean, that would change things.
Absolutely.
Does that exist? Well, I don't know. And it's been said that the neurologist that did the examination of the injuries that affected her brain in particular, like they didn't actually do it.
No, that's not okay. I understand how you would interpret it that way, but that's not what's being said.
Okay.
What she said, and like I found that while we were talking just now when I went to that document cloud thing, there's a line in there, and basically that line states, okay, so this guy has gone through, this is James Neff that I'm crediting here. He's made some notes on what's in here. The first note he makes is that Phil Hatton was the on-duty security guard, and he was not with Goldberg when the door was broken. I feel real bad because I could have let him in, but the policy was we don't do that, Hatton said. So that note is in here. This is related to the apartment guy. Then there's a second note that he's highlighted that says, according to Pennsylvania Attorney General's office recent investigation, searches for suicide were found on Ellen's computer during a 2011 forensic analysis, but the office can't say if anyone, police, or prosecutor ever looked at it. Then in the medical examiner's report, it says, so the medical examiner's report says, note, neuropathologist Dr. Lucy Rourke examined the spinal cord and concluded that there is no defect of the spinal cord. Then there's a note that he's highlighted, and it says, this is a reference to renowned neuropathologist Lucy Rourke Adams. She's a neuropathology report from Rourke Adams has never been found, and she has no recollection of doing the exam. The state attorney general investigators believe it did occur, though, based on this line in the autopsy report and statements from two detectives who worked the case. So she says she doesn't have any bills, invoices, or reports related to it. And then you see what they're saying here. What I think could have happened is like literally they could have been working in similar labs, and like he held up a giant picture and said, do you see anything here? And she came over and took a look and said no, and moved on. I don't know why he put that note in there.
I stand by. I feel like this is an important thing because what it established was whether or not an injury had occurred that would have rendered her incapable of committing the rest of the stabs.
Right, and I agree with you.
I have to say that I stand by what I said to begin with. That is what they're saying, is that she really didn't do it. Because why wouldn't there be? I mean, this is a serious examination, and it's a serious finding in this case. And so, yeah, she should have some sort of record of it, unless she could say like, oh, I have no records of anything I ever do, which would make me wonder why she's doing those types of examinations, right?
Well, I understand you saying that, but I will say that in the depositions that I've gone through so far, there is not a Lucy Rourke Adams deposition saying that she has no record of it. That is from a newspaper.
Well, have you found the report?
I have not found the report yet, but I don't see a lot of stuff in here indicating anything other than a basic autopsy and a tox.
Okay, so what are you saying?
I don't see the spinal cord examination, but what I'm saying is I also don't see an official record of her saying there is no spinal cord report or examination. She would have that, and there's no deposition from her at all.
But the report would certainly be part of the case.
It could be. I am not privy to all the case information at this point. What I'm saying is the Philadelphia medical examiner says it happened. The person that has collected this document says they can't find it. And then I found another reference in a newspaper article to her saying she didn't have a record of it. That means that like she has not presented that, but I haven't seen a deposition saying it doesn't exist, it didn't happen.
Well, I mean, if they had to get depositions from everybody who doesn't have anything in this case, it would be like a whole lot of people.
Because if it's as important as I think it is, they need a deposition from her saying she didn't do it.
I would say that the lack of that it being stated that it happened and it not being part of the case file, I don't think they need a deposition from her saying that she didn't do it. I think that if the report was there, then it would mean it existed. The fact that it's not there is weird.
So you think they made it up?
Well, I don't know. I don't understand. Like, for one thing, they were real specific, right? I guess she did other cases. Now, I think what that's based on was a Philly News reporter asking a question of an old case to Lucy B. Rourke Adams, MD. And it said, in response to a question that I don't know what it is, Stephanie, I was a civil service employee of the medical examiner's office from around 1977-78 until 2004. One of my trainees, Dr. Alexander Judkins, then took over the responsibility for neuropathology until around 2006 or 2007. I do not recall exactly. He then went to Los Angeles, and the medical examiner asked me to take on this responsibility. This was done on a contractual basis. Each case was billed on the basis of whether I did only a gross examination or whether a microscopic was done. A detailed invoice was prepared after the report was submitted. The invoice contained the OME case number, name of decedent, name of date of completed report, and the charge. Okay, the invoice contained the OME case number, name of decedent, date of completed report, and the charge. If there is no neuropathology report in the case file and no record that I charged for an examination, I would conclude that I did not see the specimen in question, although there is a remote possibility that it was shown to me. However, I have no recollection of such a case. I continued to do the neuropathology for the office after Dr. Judkins left until about 2013. Precise date escapes me. I hope this helps. Yeah, so that doesn't accomplish anything. It doesn't tell us anything.
Yeah, all I'm saying is what I'm saying is it could have been much more informal than what. It's like she could have been doing something else there. And had a working relationship with whoever made this report.
Well, I hear what you're saying, but I feel like that's not acceptable to rely on, when it's determining the manner of death of somebody.
Okay, timeline-wise, we don't know when that happened. That could have just been as they were closing it out because it's towards the end of the second part of the report.
But
my point in just mentioning that it's a possibility that it's missed is it could have been, hey, do you think does this spinal cord look damaged to you? And it looked at and they go, no, there's nothing wrong with that. It's fine. I don't know that that's possible. I'm just saying it could have been that small a thing.
Well, right. And I understand that. But I think that the reliance on saying that, she would have had her full capacity of motion, even with the injury they were talking about. I feel like they're relying on that pretty heavily to determine, if she could have done all these injuries to herself or not.
I don't.
Am I misunderstanding something?
From me?
About this? Okay, I didn't read all the gory details. I just couldn't. I just want to make sure, I don't know for certain that I could be wrong and we're wasting all this.
No, it's not that we're wasting it. I don't know what all you want me to say because this gets into wounds and some of it's pretty graphic.
Well, I just want to know if it's your impression that the exam was done by somebody qualified to do it who said, like, those had no impact and she could have done this to herself, because you've got a pretty stark line there. Either she could have done all this to herself or she couldn't have. And so if she could have done it all to herself, it's suicide.
But all of those
if
things,
she couldn't, it's homicide.
But all of those things are not being said is what I was getting at. So the note in the medical examiner's report simply states, neuropathologist Dr. Lucy Rourke examined the spinal cord and concluded that there is no defect of the spinal cord.
Right, and that would mean that she had the full functioning capability of the spinal cord.
Nope, it wouldn't.
Yeah.
No, it wouldn't, because the previous line says, associated with the wound tract are hemorrhage in the adjacent soft tissues and muscles of the left side of the back, a deficit of the dura, and focal epidural hemorrhage. Grossly, there's a bulging of the cervical cord subjacent to the dural defect. Note, neuropathologist Dr. Lucy Rourke examined the spinal cord and concluded that there is no defect of the spinal cord. That doesn't mean there's not another defect or not another problem. She's not even saying that. She's just saying, looking at the spinal cord, it doesn't look like there's anything wrong. What I'm saying is, and I know that you don't read through all the nuances in the autopsy, but I think the people talking about this did. So the dura is what is covering the spinal cord, and there is a defect there. I think that everybody is jumping to conclusions that are not medically stated in this report.
Would damage to the dura cause the same kind of
There could be other types of nerve issue.
Well, okay, so
the spinal cord is the most immediate and fatal flaw, so they go for that. That's the easiest thing. If that happened, then this happened.
Well, my understanding was that in the rendering of, her injuries and her body and everything, that it seemed on the surface like really apparent that there would have been damage.
Okay, so there's a secondary layer to this. Okay, if you go over to Cyril, I'm not going to make you read this part of it, but I'll find what you're looking for. Cyril Wecht. So he's a pretty renowned pathologist that is basically contracted by the Greenbergs to go over this report and all the photos and to come up with conclusions. So he looks at it and he marks off basically doing what I just did. He states what happened there. He goes into detail and restates what the medical examiner said about the wounds. Then he gives his own interpretation of the wounds. And so he gets into what's known as a medico-legal question. So his first medico-legal question is the same one the medical examiner would ask. He says, what's the most likely cause of death? And his professional opinion is suicidal stab wounds can rarely be multiple. Suicides by stabbing are becoming less frequent, with simpler choices being drugs, hanging, or gunshot. Cutting of the wrist and throat is often associated with suicide, whereas stab wounds to the back are unlikely to be suicide. A murder usually involves multiple stab wounds to the side, back, or stomach. In a suicide, there may be additional cuts across the wrist or tentative stabbings to see if it will hurt or to work up the courage to complete the act. Then there are usually only one wound, most likely in the chest. The multiple stab wounds to the back of the upper neck and lower head found at autopsy were unlikely suicidal stab wounds, especially the different directions. Then he indicates the different wounds. They're letters. They go A through Q. The locations of the stab wounds high on the back of the neck and lower back of the head are also unlikely for self-inflicted wounds. A suicide victim will frequently leave a note. There was none. There was no indication that the decedent was in suicidal form, and goes on to say she didn't leave a note, and he didn't believe she would stab herself through her clothing. It is unknown if fingerprints on the knife were taken or examined. He's just sort of pointing out all the problems with it. And this guy, Wayne Ross, who is a specialist in forensic and neuropathology, he chimes in. And the idea there is he found what he believes is evidence of a stab wound that penetrated the cranial cavity and severed the cranial nerves. As a result, she would experience severe brain dysfunction, and she would have traumatic brain signs of and he lists a bunch of symptoms: numbness, tingling, irregular heartbeat, bradycardia, respiratory depression, neurogenic shock, impaired loss of consciousness. He says there was evidence of strangulation. There was a mark over the front of the neck, which was consistent with a fingernail mark. And there were multiple bruises under the neck and in the strap muscles over the right side of the muscle that were compatible with what they would consider a pattern of manual strangulation. There were multiple bruises over the body, some of which were fresh and some of which were older. The patterns were consistent with repeated beatings. So there's these different things that are coming up, but none of them end up addressing whether or not the spinal cord was damaged. And that has been touted. I've seen it. I've seen what you're talking about. It is talked about in a lot of this true crime stuff where they say, oh, look, the spinal cord, there's no way she could have done that. It is not mentioned in here. And my point is whether Dr. Lucy did or did not comment on that, nobody is making any medical conclusions based on it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So this is where we're going with this. And I'm not trying to rush you along with this. And I really appreciate it because you actually have been very thoughtful on all of this. The next thing that you asked me, which I've already mentioned, was, have I ever seen cases like this? Okay, so where we're at, I think we need to look at the cases I've found. The answer is yes, I've seen cases like this. Let's bring those in and take a look at them. And I don't have the time left in this episode to do that. So that's going to be in the next episode.
Thank you for joining us. We are sponsored by LabRottiCreations.com. You can check them out at LabRottiCreations.com, and you can still use the code CRIMEXS for a fun pop pet portrait of your own pet. You can also reach us on Twitter, Instagram at TrueCrimeXS, or you can give us a call if you know anything about any of the cases that we're talking about at 252-365-5593. You can also reach us at Gmail at truecrimexs@gmail.com, and you can check out our website at www.truecrimexs.com. We'll see you next time.
This is True Crime XS.
When we dug into this case, we weren't going to do this long drawn out thing. But the truth is it does get interesting. I made a mistake in this episode. I'm not going to say what it is till later. But I think that the same mistake was probably made by people skimming these reports. It's sort of one of those things that's it's a play on letters. And I screwed up in something that I wasn't looking at. And I kept it because what I ended up doing with the Alan Greenberg case was recording our whole process over a period of time where we would go through and examine what we thought was going on and what was happening, and then basically trying to refute our theories instead of refuting, is this a homicide or a suicide? And that's the road we're headed down, is instead of asking, is this a homicide or a suicide, we started asking, well, what is this? What are we looking at? And we have at least one, probably two episodes left to explain it, and then we have a wrap-up. So if you're interested in the Ellen Greenberg case, we came to a conclusion that as of right now, when we're publishing this, no one has come to. And it actually threw us off the first time that we started looking at it. And it took us a while to sort of figure out how to articulate it all in the manner we felt would be taken not only the most seriously, but so that people would understand that sometimes the choices you're presented aren't really the only choices available.
I got another chance to rise above the emptiness.